Welcome to the 2 Cent Dad podcast, where we interview dads to discuss their journeys of intentional fatherhood while doing work they care about and living a life of purpose. I'm your host, Mike Sudik.
And so I think that the people that I know that are most successful, that have lived the most balanced life, I don't like saying that word, but the most, counterbalanced life maybe, are the people that are really, really clear. Like they're crystal clear about what they're meant to be doing, what their purpose is in life, what their definition of success is, and they can spot an opportunity that is in line with that. Most are not, and they can say no to everything else.
Today, I have a fellow podcaster, Peter Awad, who runs, or hosts, I should say, the Slow Hustle podcast. Someone that shares a similar mission to the 2 Cent Dad podcast in seeking to live life intentionally to avoid the hustle and bustle or just keeping up with the Joneses. So Peter has an interesting story, but he has a very similar mission and goals. And so wanted to have him on, and he really shares from his heart and shares a lot of cool stuff. So listen up. So I think there's some overlap in our podcast, like in terms of the content and what we're about, which is like, how do you have this balance between family, business, or other kind of purpose that you have? And so the genesis of this podcast for me was when I joined the family business, which is a small business that my father started in 99, and started to take more of an ownership role, and started a family about the same time. So I was kind of trying to balance this, like, hey, I actually care about this, business, but I really care about my family. And, you see everything around you is all talking about business, and they're talking about how to be successful in business, but they're not talking about family. And you dig a little deeper and you find that, people that are successful usually sacrifice their family on the altar of success. And so that I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And so then I started to dig a little bit more. I couldn't find any content around, this topic. And it's funny because Mark Hemian, who I interviewed, I had seen a post about, something about his family or something. And I interviewed him, and then I saw him on your podcast, and I was like, whoa, this is really cool. And so then I was like, oh, what's this Slow Hustle about? And so started doing a little bit digging in there. So I love what you're doing, man. That's why I wanted to have you on the podcast, because I appreciate it. So
yeah, thanks for having me. How do you know Hemian?
I don't know Hemian really. I just found him like online, and so he seemed like a cool guy. I think I started following him because I was doing some research on some design stuff. So my company's trying to ship a SaaS app, so we're a services business, and so we're trying to learn all about that. I think that's how I stumbled across him, and actually used Design Inc., his company, to find a designer, which was really cool. So he's a great guy.
He's an awesome dude. And where are you sitting, man? Where are you at?
So we're in Michigan, Grand Rapids, so the west coast of Michigan.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I got co-founder at one of my companies in Lansing.
Okay.
Do a lot of business with a company in Detroit, and then we have some virtual assistants in Muskegon, on the east side of the state, or the west side of the state. So
we're about 35 minutes from Muskegon.
Okay. Funny, dude.
Rapids, yeah. So
yeah,
we actually got there quite a bit in the summer to go out to the lake. So which is right out. Okay. Muskegon's right on the lake, so that's cool.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And how many kids?
So I have 3. I have a 9-month-old now, 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old. So 9-month-old girl, 4-year-old girl, 6-year-old boy.
Boy, girl. Okay. All right.
So what about you?
I'm 9, 7, 5, 2, girl, boy.
Okay. Cool. So tell me about your background, Peter, and the companies that you started, how you got to where you're at today.
Yeah, man. So long story short is I'm a full-blooded Egyptian guy. You don't meet too many of these days. And so my parents had your typical immigrant story, right? So come to the States, $500, clothing on their back, that whole thing. Working, my dad was working 20-hour days for a long time, saved up some cash, moved to Florida, and started a grocery store, because that's what brown people in Florida do. If you have Arab descent or you're Indian, you start a grocery store, and it's because it's like incredibly hard work, man. The hours are grueling, right? And so, excuse me, I grew up in that environment, and at age 7, asked my parents if I could work there. Started getting paid $5 a day, and I loved it. Like, I loved everything about it. I loved learning about the process of buying product and selling it. the relationship component of like meeting people and really identifying with folks that maybe you would think that a 7-year-old or 10-year-old or 12-year-old, because I worked there for a long time, could identify with these people, and then wearing all the hats, right? So I'm like making sandwiches, I'm selling beer when I shouldn't be, I'm selling cigarettes, I'm stocking the cooler, I'm mopping the floors, like on the trap, I'm doing everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so really, really learning that, and I just loved it. And so I think there's like there's definitely, there's nature versus nurture. I think it's a little bit of both, right? Like I had a natural just interest in business. I just loved everything about it. And so I grew up in that environment. Fast forward, went to school for engineering. I was going to school.
What kind of engineering? Computer?
Mechanical.
Okay, I was a mechanical engineering major too.
Were you?
Cool,
okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. I knew I liked you for a reason. And so, I go to school for that. And you know how it is. You're going to school 40, 50, 60 hours a week. I'm also working an internship about 20 hours a week. I did a couple of those during my tenure at school, and then started a company in my spare time, which I always joke about because there was no spare time. So started the first company, which I still own. It's e-commerce business. Started that in 2001. So I'm dating myself now, and I was running that from like midnight to 4 a.m. And so I'd come home after all these different things that I was working on, and I started that company. And so I just always had an interest in that. And
was that from your parents? I mean, that like you saw that modeled, right? You saw the hard work. You said it's nature nurture, but I mean, at the end of the day, the example was set for you that you work hard. There's not spare time in the sense there's not downtime, right? Like you're saying, this is what you do. Would you agree with that or?
Yeah, and I think that it will translate into many different ways. Like, so my siblings are not entrepreneurs necessarily, although my sister just started her own optometry practice, so maybe she is an entrepreneur now. That was really recent, but we all have this all similar basis, which is just we're hard workers, man. So my brother's an industrial engineer, my sister is an optometrist. I mean, we know how to work hard, and so I think that we learned that at the business, and then it's translated into different activities. But yeah, I mean, at the basis for sure. And when you grow up in that environment and you see just kind of what it takes, I think that takes hold in your life. You're like, oh, so this is just what people do. You just work really freaking hard, and you try to get what you want to get. And sometimes that happens, and sometimes it doesn't. But you just pick yourself up and you keep moving. And so it's interesting, that I don't think the term even existed then, but I saw my parents pivot quite a few times. Like, grocery sales are down. Let's add live bait. Grocery sales, beer sales are down. Let's add movie rentals. Oh, this is down. Let's add. I mean, they're constant like iterating because they just, and it wasn't, I don't think out of necessarily like a huge amount of insight. It was more so like out of necessity. And out of that necessity, growth, and there's a lot of growth and creativity that happens there, I think. And so, fast forward again, I'm married. I have 4 small kids, ages 2 to 9, 2 boys, 2 girls. And through a lot of ups and downs, I mean, like being in the automotive business during the recession is not a good place to be, especially when it's in like the frills of it, which is, automotive accessories. Like that's what people are going to cut on spending first. And so I got to ride that down and ride it back up. And I learned a lot about myself. I learned how I identified success. I learned about how my identity was tied to finances, and that's the way that I measured my success. And I also learned that I could not carry that home. I couldn't allow my family to ride that roller coaster with me because they didn't necessarily sign up for that, right? And the biggest thing for me, Mike, is that I would get home and I would be carrying that burden from work. And I would realize that I was hearing them, right, but not listening, or vice versa. They were there and they were talking to me, and I was nodding my head, but I wasn't soaking any of it in because I was still, like, figuratively sitting at my desk. I was still thinking about that last phone call or that last email, and it dawned on me, man. I'm like, I can't do this to my family. Like, I can't live this life, and starting to think like, I'm not going to change the fact that I'm an entrepreneur. Like it's in my blood. It's in my DNA, as we talked about. But how can I live life a little differently? And how can I live the life that I tell people I'm living, which is family first? And you hear people talk about that all the time, right? Like good old Gary Vee, right? He talks about how his family's number one, but then he also, says, and I share this all the time, that he works from sun up to sundown. He works from 5 a.m. to midnight every day. And I don't think those things can I mean, they are mutually exclusive. There's no way that you can work like that and say your family's first. It's just not going to happen. And there's a really great quote from a friend of mine, Arel Moody. He said, "What's the point of being a public success and a private failure?" And I didn't want to be a private failure. I mean, I've interviewed plenty of folks that have gone through divorce on the show, and it's like, I don't want to go down that path.
Yeah, no, I think I think so many people are buying into that Gary Vee narrative, which is like, not so much just that you have to work hard and that you can be a success, but that you can do it all. I mean, it's like that or maybe you're thinking, hey, I can do this all. It's going to take a little bit of work. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to hustle, in the wee hours of the night or something. But at the end of the day, if you're going to be mentally thinking about it, you're going to be tying all of your identity to that success. You're going to really prioritize all of that hustle, is the tagline. And it's a sexy narrative to buy into, and I think that's horrible.
Yeah,
more or less, So how do you? I'm interested because you have a podcast, the Slow Hustle podcast. Like, what are some of those nuggets that you've pulled out that the people you've interviewed have said, hey, I wish I would have known this prior, specifically maybe for people that have a family, and what are the things that they're doing that is helping them slow down? How do you get to that point, especially if you have built habits up that have made it so that you're so wrapped up in what you're doing?
Yeah, I think it's all about habit, man. And it's about like fencing off the time that's most critical to you. And they apply to business and they apply to personal life, right? And so, I want to be super clear that I love the grind. I love it. Like, I love business. I want to create things until I'm no longer living, but at the same time, that's not the only legacy I want to leave, right? I don't want to be this guy that people talk about and they're like, man, did that guy know how to grind? Like, I don't want that to be the first thing that they think about. I also didn't start a business so that I can grind until I die, right? That's the way we live. We all live life quite a bit. And it reminds me of a guest that I had on the show who was flying about 250 to 300,000 miles a year. He invested in about 1,700 companies, and then one day he came home and his wife was gone. Like, I don't want that to happen to me either, right? None of us do. And so, to answer your question, man, there's been so many lessons. But for me, I think what's been the main takeaway is that you've got to create these habits where you are militant about how you spend your time. And not being like super willy-nilly about how you do it. And the caveat there, I think, is that, when you start and I'm writing a talk about this right now for our church for next week, and it's just about finding your purpose. And I think that you start off saying yes to everything, and you kind of have to. Like, you have to, because you don't know what it is that really fires you up. You don't necessarily know for sure what your purpose is. And so you start saying yes to everything. The problem, the trap, is that we continue to do that, right? We continue to say yes to everything. We continue to be that guy or gal that's like, their answer to how you're doing is always busy, grinding, crushing, whatever your response is, and not having any margin for life, not having any space for family or any of that stuff. And so I think that when you go from that to, Derek Sivers talks about, which is an awesome blogger. If you haven't heard from him, listener or Mike, you want to look him up. But he talks about saying hell yes or no, right? So when an opportunity presents itself to you, your natural response needs to be a hell yes if you're going to say yes to it. You need to be super excited about it. And then if you're going to say, if you felt that first response, if it lines with your purpose and your passions and your definition of success, then and only then do you say yes. Otherwise, you say no to all the other golden opportunities, right, in air quotes. And so I think that the people that I know that are most successful, that have lived the most balanced life, I don't like saying that word, but the most, counterbalanced life maybe, are the people that are really, really clear. Like, they're crystal clear about what they're meant to be doing, what their purpose is in life, what their definition of success is, and they can spot an opportunity that is in line with that. Most are not, and they can say no to everything else. And so when you pair that to an incredible, scheduling habit, which we can talk about, I think that's where you find the opportunity to not only be your best self business-wise, which, because we all want to do that, but to also, more importantly, be the best, husband and father and friend.
I agree. Why do you say you caught yourself when you said balanced life because I had David Cancel, who runs a company out in Boston. He said there's no such thing. There's like you either are on your business or you're on your family, and it's always skewed one way or the other. And so unpack a little bit what you were saying, why you didn't want to say balanced life.
Because it doesn't exist. I agree, man. There is no balance, right? And if you're there like for just a blink of an eye, and then it's off to one side of the pendulum or the other. And so, there's a book, and I quote it, and almost every time I talk to someone is the one thing, and he says it better. All right, he says that there are counterbalances, right? And so I'll give you like kind of a more practical example. It's like, man, when I've become very in tune to when I am approaching burnout. I've been saying maybe yes to too many things, or even if they're in line with your definition of success and purpose, you have packed too many in, right? So maybe it's an interview day, or there's just too many interviews, or I've just got way too much stuff on my calendar, right? Which is incredible because you typically operate your own calendar, and so you're the idiot that put it on the calendar, which I find fascinating because I continue to do that, right? And so you're like, who's putting this crap on my calendar? Oh, wait, it's me. So I've been able to identify when I'm approaching that, right? And there are certain things for me, right? So I start to get stressed. I start to feel like everything's gloom and doom when it's not. Most of the time, life's pretty rad. I start to just feel down on life. And I'm like, oh, this is what Peter feels like when he's approaching burnout. And then I have got my counterbalances, right? Counterbalance may be like clearing the schedule for the rest of the week. Like, let's reschedule all this crap that's on here. I'm going to clear a bunch of stuff off. I'm going to have a beach day with the family. Or I'm going to do certain things that I know that I've identified, I'm very clear about, that recharge me. So no balance, just counterbalances, right? Or if I'm feeling like I'm not making enough progress on certain things, I know there are certain activities, whether they're phone calls I need to make or emails I need to send, that allow more progress to be made. And then I feel fulfilled on the business side. Like, okay, I'm back on track. I'm making progress again. I'm feeling good. And so it's not balance. It's all about counterbalance, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think you're preaching to the choir a little bit. I feel the same way. It's like I'm learning that even more, just like how to get in tune with when you feel burnout, because I kind of get energized when you have a lot going on. I think a lot of entrepreneurs do too. A lot of like type A type people. It's like you want to load it on. You want to say yes, even though you might think that's not the wisest thing. You like having a lot of activity, right? Mm-hmm. And then it's only then when you have so much that you get burnt out that you have to take a step back and say, okay, either there's two ways I can go about this. I can clear the schedule for the rest of the week, or I could continue on this path, and I know how it ends. I get extremely stressed and snap at my wife and yell at the kids, and then you create all this longer lasting, negative legacy, which is not good. So
yes,
I'm with you. I think that's a huge thing. I think recognizing that is huge. I think that's a good tip. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your transition from, you said you were working in the auto industry, and then you made a shift to be more self-employed, even though it sounds like you already had businesses going, side hustles, if you will. Tell me about the conversations you had with your wife around that time, and, saying, hey, I'm going to go full time on this, or, was that a discussion? Was that an interesting discussion? Was that pretty easy, or tell me about that?
Yeah. So to clarify, so that automotive business is my e-commerce company. And so I have not taken a job since I graduated college. And so I've been self-employed the whole time. But the difficult decisions and conversations would have been around that recession time, where it's like, hey, I don't want this business to go under. If I continue to pay myself, we're going to bankrupt the company. Right. And so we are going to live off of savings for a year. That was a tough discussion.
Yeah.
That was like, hey, guess what? I think that year I paid myself $9,000, right? So I could have made more money working at Subway or something. But I needed to do that, right? And so, and I don't know if this leads into the follow-up, which is like, how do you manage like those conversations and navigate those conversations, and receive that support, that moral support from your spouse. But I think it was critically important in that time. And it's interesting because those tough decisions have paid dividends, right? A company that it was at the point like near the brink of failure has come back, and it's healthier than it's ever been. We're going to have probably the biggest year we've ever had, which is in this year, 2017. And it was through those tough discussions. And it was not only my wife, but through mentors that I talked to, and they looked at things and like, hey, you're a few tweaks away from some massive success. You got to just figure out how to weather the storm. And And so I think that was probably one of the biggest lessons in business. And since then, we've had multiple successes and an incredible amount of failures along the way. But we found ourselves in a good place here.
Yeah, that's great. So tell me a little bit about how things that you're doing with your kids. It sounds like your upbringing was very entrepreneurial, but you also said that, your siblings went other ways, but it was clearly modeled like the hard work ethic, right? So now you have this slow hustle thing. You guys, I think, were traveling around in an RV for a little while. What are some
recording from the RV right now, actually?
Oh, that's awesome. Very cool. I didn't even recognize it, based on your background there. Tell me a little bit about those things that you're doing that you're trying to instill in your kids and how you're doing that. Are you guys like homeschooling? Are you guys doing intentional things, teaching them about business? Are you, tell me a little bit about your philosophy in raising your kids.
Yeah. So I'm originally from Florida. My wife's from Iowa. Before we had our first kid, we decided to move to the Midwest, right? Florida boy in Iowa doesn't do very well in like February, right? And so we started doing some February travels. Fast forward several years, we spent 10 months on the road a year ago, and just trying to immerse ourselves in different places. And there was a number of reasons there, but the component there for the kids that was most important to me was I wanted them to feel comfortable in the uncomfortable. And so what I mean is I want them to know what to do when they're the new kid on the block over and over and over again. I want them to know how to insert themselves in conversations and to be part of the group, right? To have new conversations over and over and over again, because I feel like that's one of the most invaluable skills, right? Because you can use that in business, you can use it in sales, you can use it pretty much everywhere. If you're just trying to make friends, you learn how to make friends. And so our kids now can go to the park, and by the time we leave, an hour later, this happens almost every time, they've made new friends. Happens over and over and over again. I was not that kid, man. Like we didn't travel. The family worked a lot, and I learned how to communicate and deal with customers. But you put me in a situation where I was without my bed and my own toothbrush, and I didn't know what to do, right? I didn't know how to navigate that. I was very uncomfortable. I could be very awkward, very introverted in that regard. And so I didn't want that for them. I wanted them to be able to just navigate and be able to be free, because I think in the new experiences where you learn so much, man. You learn so much about yourself. You learn so much about what you like, what you don't like when you're in these new environments, around different people, around, in different circumstances. It's incredible. And to watch that happen with them is just fascinating. And you asked about homeschooling. Yes, we currently homeschool. Ask me in 5 years how we're doing with that, right? Because we only have 2 out of the 4 that are really schooling. But so far it's working for us, man, because it gives us the flexibility to travel around and to do the things that I just talked about. But furthermore, and this definitely does not work for everybody. I'm super fortunate and grateful that I've got a wife that feels like she was meant to be home teaching the kids and being with them, and she's much more patient than I am. But
amen.
When you have,
I have an amazing wife too that I feel the same way about.
Right? So otherwise, I definitely am not of the school of thought where I feel like it's one size fits all. I think there are definitely people out there that their kids are much better suited to have parents at work and be in school, right? I think if I was home with the kids all day, I think I would do okay. But some people would not be happy, right? And because I don't have that same size patience tank as my wife does. But I feel like if you have the opportunity, it's almost hypocritical of me to not give them the flexibility that I want for myself. I have a business because of why? Because I want to do what I want, when I want, how I want, with who I want. And for them to have the flexibility to learn what they want to learn, to focus on what they learn. My sons, my 2-year-old and my 7-year-old are taking skateboarding lessons by a pro skateboarder. My daughter has been writing songs and plays the uke, and she's self-taught. They're learning incredible stuff that they just wouldn't have the time or opportunity to learn in school necessarily, for the most part. And so these are just the things, man. I feel like I don't know that it's world schooling, but I do like the idea of them being exposed to a multitude of things. And the thing that I always like to tell people is that I remember when I was interviewing for internships in college, and I had this resume, and it was all about what I was learning and the classes I was taking. And it's engineering related stuff because these are engineering positions. But I also had just recently started my company. I had 4 interviews in the same day. It was all at Siemens Westinghouse, power generation in Florida. Not a single person asked me about my schooling. They were all super curious about the business. Why? Because it's something that I was doing, right? It's not theory. It wasn't like, hey, these are things that I'd like to do. It's what I'm doing, which people want to know what you're doing. They want to see your portfolio, quote unquote. But it's also out of the ordinary, right? And so I feel like I'd rather the kids be able to have these experiences to lean on, stuff that they've done versus just theory.
I think that's really powerful. I think the exposure factor, really. I mean, it's like exposure to new people, exposure to new things. That's huge. No, I think that's really cool. So that's built into the lifestyle that you guys are doing, which is some of the travel and that sort of thing. It's a natural outflow of that. What are some of the habits that you guys have as a family, or just you in your role as a father with your kids one-on-one, that you do that you feel like is a positive habit? Obviously, I mean, you probably all have bad habits.
Oh yeah.
That is a regular thing. You spoke about habits, earlier. What is a habit that you do as a parent that you feel like is really successful?
Yeah. One of the things that I do, I'm not successful all the time, but more often than not, is having scheduled one-on-one time. And it's a big deal for me because we have so many kids, and more than most, I guess you would say. There are people with plenty more. And one of the things I didn't want to lose like an intimate connection with them. We're so frequently together, because they're homeschooled. I mean, the family's just like really, really tight family,
Mm-hmm.
But we're also in our space quite a bit, and it's fun to see them untethered, right, or unrestricted by their siblings, especially the younger ones. And so, younger ones from the older ones. And so I try to have scheduled one-on-one time, and it's scheduled Friday from noon to 1. And it may be that, I take one of the kids and we go to a restaurant that maybe we wouldn't be able to eat with, either because of cost or just because you couldn't have 4 kids in a nice restaurant. I may take them to do that. We may go for a walk. We actually went for a run yesterday, even though it's not Friday. But doing stuff like that where we can have that one-on-one, and I get to know them more as a human being, right? Without being, without them being hamstrung by the other children, and just talking to them about what's going on in their life and what's working and what's not, and what their concerns are, and the stuff that crops up from those conversations is really awesome. It's magical, man. It's invaluable, and so those are one of the things that I try to do. It doesn't work every Friday, but I like to take one of the ones kids. They call it selfie time. That's something they got from their aunt, which I hate the word selfie, period. So I'm trying to rename it something else. But yeah, man. I mean, this is one of the things, and habits are something that I harp on because people can complain, including myself. We can complain about things that aren't working in life, but not do anything about it. Mm-hmm. Or you could write them down, and so. One of the things I like to do, and I did it at the beginning of this year, and I review it every single morning as I have like goals, and one of them is to deepen my relationship with my family. And so one of the steps was to schedule this one-on-one time. One of the things was to have the habit of, or the schedule of a babysitter, a regular babysitter. And my wife and I would like to do day dates because we like to feel like we're still alive when the sun's out, right? So we'll do an afternoon. Maybe it's just 2 or 3 hours where we go do something fun, and it may just be sitting at the beach. It may just be going for a walk. And maybe grabbing some to-go food and just like walking and eating, right? The other day, it was our anniversary, and so I surprised her with a jet ski. We hopped on a jet ski for an hour, right? Just some weird stuff that you would never be able to do with a bunch of kids.
Right.
And so I say all that to say, I mean, you can complain about not having the things that you want, or you can try to get on some path, some regular schedule. It doesn't have to be expensive at all, in order to have the things that you want, right? And this is all relationship based, but you can do the same exact thing for business. You can do the same thing for your spiritual life. You can do the same thing for relationship with your friends. It doesn't really matter. But like having those habits, they go a really, really long way. And Friday afternoons for us, is to me is kind of irreplaceable.
No, that's great. I think that's huge. It's really what you're saying is kind of baby steps too. You're saying, hey, have a goal, and then say what's one small thing you can do. I mean, you're saying having one-on-one time with your kids isn't really that big of a commitment, but it adds up over time, right? You're saying, okay, this is like compound interest. You're like, I'm gonna do this small little thing, and then that might lead into other things, which I think is really cool. Yes. I heard someone say one time, when they talk about specifically with your spouse, like FaceTime versus shoulder-to-shoulder time. And it's like, you have a lot of shoulder time where you're just going through the grind of, making sure the kids are fed and doing what you got to do, but just prioritizing the face time. And I thought that was a good way to think about it, face to face versus shoulder to shoulder,
Somebody said recently, this was last Sunday, hit me hard. He said, are you going through life with your spouse just running side by side, like you're on parallel roads, right? Do you actually know what's going on in their life? And he was talking about how his wife looked at him one day and she was crying and she's like, you have no idea what's going on in my life. And I think as spouses with children, you're really just kind of caught up in the stuff that you need to get done, right? And you're doing life side by side, like shoulder to shoulder. I like that, like you said. But do you really know what's going on in their life? Have you stopped to say, hey, what's tough with you? Like what's going right? What's not working? How can I help you? You know, maybe you don't need to help at all. Maybe you just need to listen. So I like that, man. I think face to face is it's just so critically important, man.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for your time, Peter. I won't keep you any longer, but any words of wisdom or 2 cents, as you say, as we go?
Yeah, I think that something I've been harping on all year so far is just pay attention. I mean, so many of us are going through life with our eyes closed, and we're complaining about things, and we're frustrated with things, and we're not doing anything about them. Like, we're not truly paying attention to what's working and what's not. And so if you sit down, and even if it's like for 15 minutes with a blank sheet of paper and a pen, and just like brain dump about like what's going on, what's working and what's not working, and categorize them in the categories of your life, right? It's marriage, spiritual, parenting, everything.
Yeah.
And then try to get more of what's working, and try to get rid of to the highest extent that you can of what's not working. Like, just really truly pay attention to what's going on in your life and do something about it.
Yeah. Great wise words. Thank you so much, Peter. You can find Peter, Slow Hustle Podcast. I will link all this up in the show notes, so you'll have access to all things Peter. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, bro. Appreciate it.
And thanks for listening to the show. You can find out more about us and sign up to receive updates at 2centdad.com. If you liked what you heard or just want to say hi, you can shoot me an email at mike@2centdad.com. Please leave a review on iTunes if you like the show. It helps us to get the word out to the most people possible. And the show is made possible through the support of BC Group International, building software teams since 1999.